viewers, it is my pleasure to welcome you once again for another episode of the Stakeholder Outreach Initiative. Before I begin, I want to thank you on behalf of my team at P3 World Council for giving a phenomenal response for an initiative where we are traveling across the world, bringing you the pulse of the world markets and how the projects, how the markets, and how our ecosystems have got impacted due to the COVID-19 pandemic and what our future holds for us. Today, we are on a mission to explore Africa once again. After having traveled through Malawi, after having gone through Namibia and Nigeria, today I am in a country where in East Africa, and the country is Kenya. Kenya is famous for its classic savanna safaris, and it's a country of dramatic extremes and classic contrasts. It is known for its colorful tribal cultures, freshwater lakes, and coral reefs. It is one of the important countries in East Africa. And my guest today, joining me for the Stakeholder Outreach Initiative, is Mr. Ibrahim Kitoo, who is the Chief Legal Officer with KenGen, that is the Kenya Electricity Generating Company. Before I begin, let me first give you a brief introduction of Mr. Kitoo. Mr. Ibrahim Kitoo is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya of more than 12 years hands-on legal corporate experience spanning the sectors of insurance, oil and energy, tax, banking, energy, public-private partnerships, public procurement, projects development, structuring and management, corporate governance, arbitration, and disputes resolution. He holds a master's degree in law, specializing in public finance and financial services, law and bachelor's degree in law, all from the University of Nairobi, Strategic Leadership Development Program, that is the SLDP, at the Kenya School of Government, and currently he is pursuing the Oxford Leading Strategic Projects Program at the Oxford University, the Sage Business School. He is currently serving as an audit committee member of the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, member of the Audit Committee at the Office of the Attorney General and Department of Justice, member of the Audit and Risk Committee of the Law Society of Kenya, board member with the Anglican Development Services, Eastern, and member of the Professional Business Development Committee of the Association of Professional Societies of East Africa. He is also a certified CP3P, which is the Public-Private Partnerships Program from APMG World Bank, and also he is a projects management professional, PMP practitioner. Currently, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Kitoo is serving as the Chief Legal Officer, Projects and Dispute Resolution with the Kenya Electricity Generating Company, PLC, that is known as the KenGen. Mr. Kitoo, on behalf of my team at P3 World Council, I want to welcome you and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your views with us.
Thank you, Ashal. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kitoo, to begin with, one of our questions that we explore with all our learned guests is to understand the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on their countries and the ecosystems that they work in. So I'm sure in context to the KenGen or the utilities market and in general, the ecosystem or the market of Kenya, what has been the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on your country?
Yeah, Ashal, I think one of the things I need to mention is that COVID-19 came as a what we call a disruptor to the normal way of doing business, both in the country, of course, in the whole world, the world is at large, and of course, even in the context of the power sector. And one of the things which happened is that I would say that it actually caught most of the institutions and even countries unawares in terms of the way they were going to progress in terms of doing business, owing to the fact that this is something which had not happened before. And just to contextualize that is that we could see the way the world got shocked in terms of preparedness. And we could also see the erratic nature in terms of the intervention mechanisms which were put into place in the whole world. And of course, I want to contextualize the effect to Kenya, and of course, to especially the power generation sector. So what happened is that with COVID-19 coming into place, institutions and even the countries as a whole had to start to prepare itself so that then it can be able to minimize the adverse effects of COVID-19, and of course ensure that the profitability was actually not compromised. The other thing is that, of course, there was also an aspect to do with the effect on the business continuity. So what I'll say is that in Kenya, we saw the government of Kenya come in handy and, of course, decisively to put into place agile mechanisms to address the likely impact of COVID-19. Of course, we had the government introduce guidelines and, of course, COVID-19 protocols within which the citizens and even anybody within the country was expected to abide with. And some of the things we saw is that the government was also able to introduce mechanisms of reducing the adverse effects of COVID-19, some of which was actually reduction of the tax obligations, both on the companies and, of course, even to the citizens. The other thing we also saw is that, which is even ongoing right now, is that the government has been able to find ways of mitigating the harsh effects of COVID-19, especially to people who are actually in the small and micro enterprises, by introducing what we call guarantee fund, which is actually guaranteed by the government of Kenya to some of these institutions, so that then it can make them a little bit agile. Thank you.
Oh, so you just mentioned about the guarantee fund. Can you just speak more about it? I mean, what is it exactly? Can you just elaborate more on that?
Yeah, what I will say is that what happened is that because most of the institutions and especially the SMEs were caught unawares, you realize that in terms of cushioning themselves against the reduced availability of credit, because most of the financial institutions, of course, went slow in terms of financing. And of course, for the projects which are actually under development and even the needs which are under development by even SMEs, you realize the banks became a little bit shy because you are not sure about the availability of revenue for their clients. So you realize that financing institutions went a little bit slow in terms of financing. So the government had to come in so that then it can find a way in which it can make some of these institutions and even SMEs a little bit attractive in terms of allowing the financial institutions to get that confidence that events of default will be addressed. So that is how the guarantee fund by the government came in handy. What I can confirm is that it's yet to be in place, but then mechanisms are actually in top gear to address that through legislation, which is at the tail end. Yes.
Okay. And Mr. Kitoo, did Kenya see, were there a series of lockdowns in your country, or like there were no lockdowns imposed?
Yeah, actually what happened is that in the initial onset of COVID-19, the country went into what somebody can call close to 80% lockdown, because the president issued that directive. And then people were limited in terms of the working hours. People were working from 8 to around, at one point when we were starting, to around 2. Then, of course, progressively, the time was increased to around 5. And then we also saw a kind of lockdown, which affected the time within which people are expected to be home. That one has been reducing drastically, so that means the time has been increased from the time we started to now. And of course, this can be attributed to the fact that the situation is now within control. People are properly sensitized, then the mechanisms to control the virus are actually very much in place.
Okay. Mr. Kitoo, you just mentioned about the utilities sector, which is the power and water, I'll term it as. Certainly, power and water is something which is always there. I mean, we'll always see projects, and certainly that sector is the one which usually does not get that much affected. In my introduction, I mentioned about Kenya being one of the famous savanna or safari destinations in Africa. How has tourism got affected? Because I'm sure tourism in most of the countries have got severely affected. So can you comment on that? I mean, how has tourism got affected in your country?
Yeah, what I can say is that the effect of COVID-19 has actually affected literally every sector in the country. But then I'll try to mention its effect in terms of the power sector and, of course, in the hospitality sector. The other sector I'll also try to look at is generally the financing. So what actually happened is that for the power sector, we saw what somebody can describe as actually a contracting needs in terms of power utilization. And of course, Kenya is actually structured in 3 ways. We have the power off taker, which is the distribution arm called Kenya Power. We have Kenya Electricity Generation Company, which is the company I work for, which is actually majorly tasked with generation, 80%. Then, of course, the 20% remaining is done by the independent power producers. Then, of course, we also have the transmitters. So what are the transmission company, which is called KETRACO. So one of the things we saw is that now in terms of utilization now of power, most of which is actually the bulk of it, which is done by manufacturing industry, went down. And the effect of that is that the utility, which is the off-taker, Kenya Power, almost issued what we call force majeure notices to the suppliers of the generators of power. That means the independent power producers, and even by extension, the government distributor, which is KenGen. So, of course, negotiations were triggered towards addressing that, and whether whether COVID-19 was actually a force majeure in terms of the power purchase agreement which had been signed with Kenya Power. So the discussions have actually been ongoing. And then what we also realize is that because of the social distancing expectation out of the COVID-19 guidelines, then one of the things which happened is that these institutions had to find a way of complying. And of course, what you could see is that most of the staff were expected to work at home. And the natural effect of that was that, in addition to the reduced demand, then of course we had the issue in terms of the labor, how labor is actually affected. The other thing was the issue to do the project implementation, because most of the projects relating to power sector do not really rely on products or supplies from the local manufacturers. So because of the closing down of course, the skylines, what we saw was that there was actually a kind of reduced implementation of projects. Some of the contractors would actually claim that they are not able to access some of these materials. And of course, negotiations had to be done to find a suitable way in which you can balance both the interest, both for the contractors and of course of the clients. And this basically affected not only the power sector, but the construction and infrastructure sector as a whole. So then in terms of the hospitality, of course, because the skylines were closed and Kenya relies heavily on, foreign citizens.
Correct.
We realized that then we were forced to rely on domestic tourism, which was also contracted because of the aspect we just discussed. People were very cautious about traveling, and of course, what we realized is that most of the hotels and even most of those the parks actually closed down, and of course, like what I can confirm is now we are almost getting back to the normal situation. But then we saw that kind of intervention whereby businesses were actually contracted in terms of operation.
Got it. Yeah. Mr. Kitoo, you just mentioned that 80% of the power generation in Kenya is done by KenGen, and the rest 20% is distributed within the independent power producers. What I want to understand from you is, in the context of public-private partnerships, when we see at PPPs, how has PPPs evolved in Kenya in terms of the power sector? Especially with regards to KenGen, and what is the current status, and how are PPP projects, if any, how have they got impacted because of the pandemic situation? If you can help us understand the way they have evolved in Kenya, we'll really like it. Yeah.
Ashal, what I can confirm is that public-private partnerships in the country, that means in Kenya, is actually something which has been here for quite some time. And tracing back to the power generation sector, it has actually been in existence for more than 10 years. The only thing is that the initial PPPs existed not under the current Public-Private Partnerships Act. Rather, they existed under what we call the conventional public procurement law. But then some few years back, that is way back in 2013, the government now decided to have a specific legislation to regulate, of course, the project development and, of course, project delivery and monitoring and, of course, projects management in general as it relates to public-private partnerships. So we currently have a law called Public-Private Partnerships Act for 2013. It also has enabling regulations, of course, that is to add flesh and, of course, operationalize the act. And then what I can confirm is that PPPs in Kenya have actually been developed, and they have actually been done in a number of sectors. Some of which is actually in the education sector. We've seen them in the road sector, transport especially, And then I can see that currently we are actually utilizing PPPs for power generation sector.
Okay.
And what is happening, like currently KenGen is actually doing a project development for around 140 megawatt, which is being done on a public-private partnership. And we are currently at a stage we call the request for proposals, whereby we now want to issue requests for proposals to the partners or private parties, which we are able to identify. And then we are looking forward to identifying one to deliver on this particular project, which is based on 25 years tenure.
Okay.
In terms of the utilization of PPPs, I can actually see the scope in terms of sector utilization of PPPs, even progressing to areas like hospitality, hospitality, and especially also in the area of health services, which is actually triggered by COVID-19, because what happened is that COVID-19 was able to test the underbelly in terms of the country's preparedness to deliver on emergency health services, especially in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic.
So what I understand is, Mr. Kitoo, that PPPs are like more than around approximately 10 years old for Kenya, and in the power generation sectors as well, you are considering PPPs with regards to power generating projects, which you just mentioned, a 140 megawatt project that is in the stage of RFPs, which is there. Can you help us understand what are the major challenges and issues that usually the PPP ecosystem faces in Kenya? I mean, when you mentioned about the different sectors as well, can you generally help us understand the brief challenges and issues of PPPs in Kenya?
Yeah, Ashal, one of the things I can tell you is that public-private partnerships is actually full of what somebody can call legal rigmarole. It's quite complex, and the procedure, so to speak, I cannot avoid to say that the procedure is quite bureaucratic in the current legal regulatory regime. One of the things I can say is that, of course, there's a case as to why the legal structure for PPPs is structured as such, because it's actually a new area of delivering projects, and of course are trying to cover on them and the inadequacies in terms of the government funding to some of these projects.
That's true.
Which of course calls for the off-balance sheet financing. But then one of the things I will identify in terms of challenges for PP, of course, is one of the things that is an aspect of capacity building, which is needed. The capacity in the country, yes, it's commendable, but it still falls short of what is expected. The other thing I will look at, or rather I want to mention, which is actually an obvious challenge, is the culture to believe that public-private partnerships is actually the optimal solution to our problems. It's not a panacea to our problems, so to speak. So one of the things you'll actually realize is that the country has had to find a way in which we can be able to address those challenges. The other challenge we'll actually address is an aspect to do with the expectations. The country, unlike before, is in a situation whereby since the year 2010, when we got the new constitution, which is quite robust in terms of expectations from the citizens, things to do with public participation, stakeholder engagement, things to do with environmental concerns, things to do with the public procurement issues in the context of value for money. And of course, one of the other things I'll mention is that the aspect to deal with striking a balance between protecting the interest of the public entity, which is contracting, and the balances of the investors, the people who want to invest in the PPP project. Because it calls for balance. So those are the challenges. But then one of the things I would want to say is that we have seen a number of interventions in place. We've seen like the Australian government has been able to deliver short courses, which takes at least 3 months in Australia, and of course in South Africa, University of Queensland, and of course University of Pretoria, to be able to build capacity to especially public entities, whereby PPPs are likely to be delivered in Kenya, and of course in addition to the whole Africa. The other thing we've also seen is that we've seen an intervention or support from the World Bank in terms of capacity building. Institutions like Power Africa. We've seen even law firms interacting, or rather doing a kind of partnership with
Correct.
institutions like RTI and the other institutions, of course, Power Africa, towards doing capacity building for PPPs. The other thing is that we have also seen universities trying to build on capacity on short courses like Strathmore University on public-private partnerships, and of course trying to find a way in which people can get qualified at least through the stages of CP3P.
That's a good step, Mr. Kitoo. And just taking on from one of the biggest challenges that you mentioned. Yes, I would certainly agree that finding the fine balance between the interests, protecting the interest of the public sector, which is the contractors, as well as the investors of the private sector, is one of the challenges that any PPP project faces. But I want to come to the question of capacity building that you just mentioned, and that is something which is one of the biggest challenges. And what we see it as that PPPs certainly are one of the ways to generate jobs as well for the local talent that's there. And nobody, a local basically understands the local dynamics well, the regional dynamics well. And since it's a PPP project, the attachment of local expertise would be different than getting someone from outside to do the same project. My question to you, Mr. Kitoo, on this is, when you just mentioned about capacity building, you've mentioned about the Australian University or the World Bank helping you out. What are the other steps which have been taken around in this particular area of capacity building to empower local talent in Kenya? Is there a PPP unit that is taking up, or the ministries are training up their staff or their local officers for PPP projects?
Actually, what I can confirm is that there's really what I can call a robust legal systems and, of course, institutional mechanisms within the country to address the issue of capacity building and, of course, successful project delivery in the context of PPPs in the country. And one of the things I would be keen to mention to you is that we actually do have quite a number of institutions. We have the law, of course, which sets up these institutions. And some of the institutions to mention, of course, will be Kenya. Kenya as a country delivers most of the projects through implementing agencies, some of which, like in the power sector, we have KenGen, we also have KETRACO, we have Kenya Power, and of course, even in the transport sector, we have institutions like the Kenya National Highways Authority, which has just actually delivered a number of projects on PPP, and it's currently delivering two more projects on PPPs. So what happens is that those mechanisms are in place, and in addition to that, of course, we have the PPP unit, which is housed within the National Treasury. Okay. We also have, in terms of dispute resolution, we have the Public-Private Partnerships Petitions Committee, which is now the body which is able to address issues to do with disputes arising out of public-private partnerships procurement. Okay. Fully housed with secretariat and with members in place and ready to address disputes within their timelines. So in terms of the legal regulatory environment and, of course, institutions, the country is ready to go.
These are welcome steps, Mr. Kitoo. I mean, good to and glad to see the massive steps being taken in the area of capacity building, especially for PPP projects. You just mentioned, Mr. Kitoo, that the PPP sectors, when we look at, so you just mentioned the sectors of power and water. Yes, I mean, those are the important ones. Road and education. So apart from these, which are the other key sectors where PPP projects are being undertaken? Is there anything being done in the area of healthcare? And also, what we are seeing is digitalization. When I say digital infrastructure building up, so are there any projects being done in the area of education and ICT?
What I can confirm is that in the strict sense of public-private partnership, and this context I'm actually talking about public-private partnership in the context of what the law provides, we do not appear to have so much of PPPs being developed in the context of the health sector. But then what is happening, and of course, like I said, based on what actually happened with COVID-19, I think the discussions are actually ongoing in terms of how we can deliver projects towards the health sector, of course, in the context of the public-private partnerships law in the country. But then, loosely speaking, there are those kind of transactions which look like they are public-private partnership, but they're actually not. They can come in the form of joint ventures. They can come in the form of joint development agreements. They can come in the form of what somebody can call conventional public procurement. So I can say that we have made some of those projects, attempts to deliver some of those projects or services through those mechanisms, but not majorly strictly within the legal framework of the public-private partnerships. But in the context, they look like PPPs, but they are not.
Got it. Got it. Mr. Kitoo, when it comes to international stakeholders who are looking forward to be a part of the Kenya growth story or the Kenya PPP ecosystem, what would be your message, or rather, what would be your outlook with regards to the investment horizon in Kenya? How would you describe it as in regards to utilities sector, not only utilities but other key sectors which you mentioned about the road sector and the education sector? So anyone who is looking forward to being a part of it, what would be your message, or how would you tell about it?
My first general point will be that the Kenyan investment climate is quite attractive. So to speak, I can say it's quite bankable for anybody interested with investing in the country. We have a quite host of opportunities. And of course, one of the things to mention that we actually have what we call, we have a specific, institution, public institution, which deals with the attractiveness of public investment, which is called, in the country. The other thing I can also mention is that in terms of the ease of doing business, the last 10 years has actually seen the country revolutionize in terms of, unbundling the complexities surrounding foreign investment to the country. In terms of stability, political stability, and of course, legal regulatory stability in the country, which is very key for investors, Kenya is well grounded in terms of protection of foreign direct investors in the country. And then, of course, in terms of institutions, the institutions have actually been automated. So many processes are actually automated. And then I can say that the country is prepared for anybody who is willing to invest in the country. Specific to the energy sector, I can say that unlike before, the energy sector is now almost completely unbundled in that we have generation unbundled. Like now, KenGen competes with independent power producers in the country for power generation. We also have distribution was recently unbundled through the new Energy Act. So that means anybody who wants to distribute can actually come and compete with Kenya Power. Of course, that may take a little bit of time, but the law now favors that, and it allows that to happen unlike before. So then the other thing I'll be keen to mention is that even in terms of addressing things to do with corruption, the country is actually in the right track towards zero tolerance to corruption. The institutions are in place. We can see them working. There's support from the government, starting from the president all the way down. And of course, I can say that the country is ready to go in terms of attracting foreign investment. The other thing is in terms of disputes resolution, the country has vibrant, robust disputes resolution mechanisms in terms of the courts, in terms of even things to do with arbitration. We have the Nairobi Center for International Arbitration. The country is also open to foreign arbitrations in the cases whereby the transactions demand such, and especially for complex foreign transactions. Then the other thing I'll also be keen to mention is that in terms of hospitality, the country is quite hospitable to allow people to come to the country. We have never had an instance of people talking about expropriation for foreign investments. We've never had such an instance in the country. So I'll say it's a country, and everybody who is keen to invest and get a good return on investment, especially in the emerging sectors, should feel free to come and invest.
That's true. And Mr. Kitoo, I'll second you on that, because I've been studying Kenya when it comes to PPPs, and certainly I've seen a positive growth and a very impressive development that is happening in the country when it comes to PPPs in different sectors, not only the power and water, but definitely the other sectors as well. And what you mentioned, a couple of points which I would reiterate for our followers, and also for as a best practice rather, is the importance of having a very robust regulatory framework. Because if you have that, even if the resources change, certain other external circumstances change, but when you have the foundation very strong in terms of having a strong regulatory framework, I'm sure, I mean, everything gets automated well. The projects are well managed. And when it comes to the other point that you mentioned was in context to corruption as well. Yes, because this is one aspect, many countries face. And if this particular aspect is dealt strongly, nothing like it. I mean, that is something a welcome point for many international stakeholders to come and be a part of any country's investment ecosystem. Mr. Kitoo, my closing question to you is, many countries face a problem when it comes to the funding of projects. So does Kenya, I mean, do you face these kinds of problems, or I mean, how has been the support of multilateral banks, and how is Kenya managing the entire aspect of funds and financing of capital projects?
Ashal, one of the things I can confirm is that Kenya is very attractive to both foreign and even local investors in terms of funding projects. Okay. I can say that that one doesn't lack, both for private and even for the public sector. Okay. But then one of the things I think which may have been a challenge is that it's the aspect to do the bankability of the projects. And of course, when you talk about bankability of projects, then it means that what we are looking at is ability to package a project so that even when a potential investor looks at it, yes, may it be a foreign, a foreign bank, development financial institution, may it be a local bank, or even institutions like MIGA for the purposes of guarantees, everybody will be keen to look at the attractability of that project and being able to answer the question as to, am I going to get a suitable return on my investments? That is one of the things. The other thing is, of course, things to do with the social, environmental considerations, which all feed into the bankability of a project. And I'll try to mention one thing. No one will be keen to invest in a project whereby the stakeholders have not been sensitized to risk your money in terms of financing the project, then midstream, the project gets itself into these things to do it challenging in court for lack of public participation, environmental concerns, poor stakeholder engagement. So I will say that the country is quite attractive for that. People are actually coming day in, day out. Both multilateral banks, multilateral institutions, foreign banks are willing to fund. We also getting that kind of appetite in terms of people want to invest in terms of equity. You know, venture capitals are actually willing to actually invest in a number of these projects. But I think what will actually make them do or not do is the attractiveness of the project.
That's true.
But then what I can confirm is that there are a lot of discussions, there are a lot of trainings to people, and of course their capacity building in the countries, it's at high level as we speak. People are being trained on project management, people are doing courses on public-private partnerships, and these trainings are actually happening even at the university levels, even at the professional levels. So those discussions are happening, and then what I can say is that in the next few years, I think it will be a whole host of opportunity for the country, both in terms of the projects under development, the projects being delivered, the projects which are running, and of course, so many people will be attracted to the country. But I can say that it's a country which is ready to go. It's a country whereby so many things are happening, and we can only expect that things will even become better as we progress.
That's great.
But it's a country full of opportunities.
That's great. And one word that you mentioned, a key word, Mr. Kitoo, and that is where we as P3 World Council are also working with stakeholders, is to increase the bankability of the projects. But what you mentioned, I will just repeat it and I'll reiterate once again, is when it comes to the bankability of the project, there is not one single factor that makes a project bankable. It's like a wheel, many wheels working together, and if many wheels function, then only the project becomes bankable. What Mr. Kitoo mentioned, ladies and gentlemen, capacity building is one aspect of it. Leadership is one aspect of
Very
it.
true.
Strong
Very
leadership,
true,
a strong political willpower to support development projects is also one of the key factors for increasing the bankability of the projects. And very, very important is how the country deals with the topic of corruption. So these are, when these basic fundamentals are ticked, when they are set right, nothing can stop, nothing, because the thing is, it indirectly gives a message to the international community that yes, the project is packaged well, there is no harm in going ahead and investing, because we are sure that the returns would be good. That's what Mr. Kitoo just mentioned. And I'm sure what he just spoke about Kenya and the positive growth prospects that the country offers. Ladies and gentlemen, my study basically and my analysis over the past couple of months has certainly given me an assurance that yes, Kenya is one of the strategic markets in East Africa. The population is young and dynamic. The country is seeing a massive transformation, and it is opening up to huge opportunities in not only the utilities sector, but also education and the other roads and infrastructure projects. Mr. Kitoo, on behalf of my team at P3 World Council and our global followers who are watching this interview, I want to thank you for sparing time with us and sharing a perspective of Kenya and especially KenGen about what the country offers to the international community when it comes to PPP projects.
Thank you, Mr. Shal.
Thank you so much. And we wish you a speedy and a healthy economic recovery for your country.
Likewise for your institution.
We look forward to being in touch with you, and P3 World Council certainly looks forward to engage not only with KenGen, but the other government institutions and private sector stakeholders in Kenya in taking ahead the journey of PPPs.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Kitoo.